Hi, everybody. Today we are here with Coping with Stress, Upheaval for Bar Applicants and New Lawyers in the Midst of a Global Pandemic. Today we have a panel of speakers that could talk to bar students and new lawyers about how to cope with stress. Over the past couple of months with the issues involving COVID, our entire society has changed, including what's changed with getting to the bar, our profession, and coping with stress. In a normal year, actually in the best of years, last year in 2019, before all of this happened, the Young Lawyers Division of the Florida Bar did a survey and found that 61% of new lawyers were either suffered from depression or anxiety. And that's when the job market was good. That's when people would take the bar and know when they were taking it, and it wouldn't be changed on 3 different occasions. This year, while Brian and I were doing the petition for diploma privilege, well, not really diploma privilege, for supervised practice, we saw a lot of people that were taking the bar that had a lot of difficulties because their expectations were changed, because they were all set to take the bar exam and it got moved on 3 different occasions because of not having a job, because not having insurance. It created a lot of stress. And it's something that nobody really has addressed. It's not something that the bar has addressed other than providing 3 telehealth sessions. And it's not something that employers have addressed in saying that we're going to provide additional coverage or we're going to hire you early. And it's something that we've essentially, as a profession, essentially blown off. Now, I've brought together 3 very good speakers that could talk about what to do, how to deal with stress, how to deal with it both in dealing with the Board of Bar Examiners and dealing with employers, and how to deal with it individually, how to get help. And hopefully we'll provide some solutions and some means on how to deal with what we're dealing with now. If there are any comments or any suggestions, please feel free to type them in the webinar chat or on Facebook Live. Feel free to type in any of your questions and we'll try to address them to the best of our ability. Our speakers today, our panelists, include Kelly Charles Collins, who is a powerhouse attorney and an expert on dealing with unconscious bias in the workplace. She consults with employers and gives them the benefit of her 20-plus year experience. Also, we have Brian Cuban. Brian Cuban is the author of a phenomenal book, The Addicted Lawyer, which I would suggest that you all purchase and see what he has gone through, his journey in becoming a lawyer, and I look forward to the advice that he's going to give everyone today. Third, we have Brian Tannenbaum. Brian Tannenbaum is the lawyer that represents lawyers or lawyers who want to be lawyers. He is one of the most respected lawyers in Miami-Dade, and a good friend of mine, and also another author of a book called The Practice. And Kelly also has her book, which I don't have a copy of because I don't have it here. And I am the only participant in this panel who is not an author. I am litigation director of Disability Independence Group, and we represent persons that have disabilities in order to expand opportunities that they have both inside the legal profession and in society as a whole. And because 61% of all new lawyers and law school folks are suffer with depression and anxiety, it turns out that I am in the perfect profession. And I'd like to start out with what I do to handle stress before I turn the tables over to Brian for him to talk about his own experience. I am a firm believer in getting mental health help. I see a mental health professional myself. I suffer from anxiety. I firmly believe, and for those who don't know me, most of the law out there, cases out there in Florida about emotional support animals are mine. I do have my dog here, and we take her, and she comes to the office every day, and when I need help and a little bit of support, I pet my emotional support, litigation support animal as much as I can. And I'm a trial lawyer, and I've been doing this for almost 25 years now. So it's a difficult road, and we all get help. And later on, I'll come and talk more about how to deal with this in an employment focus, but let me turn the tables now over to Brian. Cuban.
I say BC or BT. I think to understand what I do to manage stress, first, you need some context of how I got where I am, the journey here. I am in long-term recovery. I'm a lawyer in long-term recovery from cocaine use disorder, cocaine addiction, alcohol use disorder, quote unquote, alcoholism. And I put that in air quotes because it's not a diagnosis. The diagnosis is alcohol use disorder. I manage major depressive episodes. I've been to 2 trips to a psychiatric facility, the first after a near suicide attempt in 2005, 3 failed marriages as a result of drug and alcohol use, one more I get a free set of steak knives. Also a thriving law practice that went to no law practice as a direct result of my mental health issues, and able to reinvent and redirect myself into recovery, and now moving on almost 14 years in recovery. And I'm also dealing with both bulimia and exercise bulimia. Yes, guys do get eating disorders. About 25 to 40% of all those with eating disorders are male. And interesting, in the law student survey that was done by David Jaffe, one of the co-authors out of American University, they found that 1 in 3 law students reported engaging in disordered eating. So eating disorders are an issue in the law school environment. So everything I do and the routine I've had to change I hate to use isolation because isolation is a problem as we go through this, but the routines I've had to reinvent for me all revolve around not wanting to put myself in a position where I relapse in any of these different mental health issues that I may feel I have a good handle on, but this pandemic which is trauma, has resurfaced many different feelings, and many of those are related to old trauma in my life. And for that, I've had to learn to create new routines, find ways to fill time rather than become depressed. I've redirected my therapy. I am in therapy once a week. There's nothing wrong with that. I make sure I am on my antidepressants. I take Lexapro 20 megs a week. There's nothing wrong with that. And I've developed a whole new set of coping routines and that have aided me, such as mindfulness, meditation. I do a lot of mindfulness showers with apologies to the water conservationists out there. I spend a lot of time in the shower just clearing the mechanism. And here is one thing I learned in my therapy that has really helped. I've done a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. And what do we learn in cognitive behavioral therapy? Something I practice every day. I get up every morning and I remind myself that most of the thoughts I will have today that are negative are not fact. I have created them to provide myself a security blanket and provide myself a bubble against feeling stressed, feeling anxiety, feeling depressed as we go through all of these events taking place today.
Brian, I'd like to ask you a question. A lot of your book, you talked about how to get help and to get help when you are ready to get help. When you went through the law school experience.
Yes.
You've taken 2 bars. How, when a person is dealing with what a lot of these law students are dealing with, they may have issues with depression, they may have issues with substance abuse, and in your book you talked about you can only get help when you want to get help. What was that point for you, and how would you seek help if you were one of these law students? I mean, one of these graduates.
Well, that's going to be a jurisdictional question too, but across the board, when I was in law school, this was the mid-'80s, we didn't even have a dean of students at Pitt Law, and it was a much more intense drinking culture. Okay, we were having drinking hard alcohol and having hard alcohol happy hours right in our student lounge, and which doesn't happen today, obviously. And we have deans of students now who tend to be the first point of contact and the linchpin in kind of directing students on which way they can go. So back then, if I wanted to seek help, I would have either had to go to my parents, which I wasn't about to do because I was ashamed, didn't want them to know. I would have had to go to the dean of the law school, which I certainly wasn't going to do because in those days, seeking help was a weakness, and it's still a stigma today, or somebody who was in 12-step, and AA is the most well-known, or something like that would have had to reach out to me. What we didn't have back then, which we have now, are lawyers' assistance programs that I know Florida's does, Texas does, that help law students as well. So if that was in place back then, I would have reached out to my lawyer's assistance program. Now, as a law student, this is all revisionist recovery with everything I know today. Back then, I might have said to myself, if I reach out to them, it's going to get out. It's going to get out. It's going to get to the Board of Law Examiners. If I take the bar, I'm going to have to fight for my license. They're going to make me jump through hoops. I won't get to take the bar exam with my class. I won't get to get my license conferred with my class because they're going to turn it into a beatdown for me. That's a very natural thought process. And talking to students today, many law students, I tell them, look, it's just not that way. And I'm not convincing them of everything. It is confidential. No one's going to rat you out. And here's where I try to bring law students today. I call it the kick the can syndrome and the Peter Principle of Recovery syndrome. The instinct today, anecdotally, in talking to a lot of law students, is to kick the can of depression, kick the can of substance use, kick the can of problem drinking down the road. If I don't seek help today, if I don't deal with this now, I don't have to report this now. I'll kick this can down the road. I can still achieve. I can take the bar and I deal with that later. But these things, especially alcohol and substance use disorder, are progressive. And what I try to get them to understand is that can get smaller and smaller and smaller, and it gets harder to kick. And what happens in the meantime is the Peter Principle of Recovery takes over. You think you're performing in law school, your law review, or you're making your grades, and you're dealing with depression, or you're dealing with substance use or alcohol. But here's what's really going on. the level of high functioning that you are achieving continues to shrink, continues to shrink, and continues to shrink. And what do we do so we don't have to acknowledge that in ourselves, that we have a problem? We keep ducking and kneeling and kneeling and kneeling so we can stay under that shrinkage and tell ourselves that we are high functioning, putting out the same amount of work, but what is happening is the work expands to fit the functioning. And by the time you move out of law school and into practice, who knows how close you may be to consequences catching up to the problem. So instead of kicking the can down the road, I tell law students, deal with it now. Deal with it now, because whether it's whatever happens with the law examiners, whatever happens with the bar exams, it's not going to get better. It is just not going to get better. And it may get a lot worse when you're in the middle of a practice, when you're representing clients, when you have a family, when you have a kid. Why do you want to wait for that? Deal with it at the highest possible point, not the lowest possible point. And that's a difficult conversation to have, because I look at the way I was back then. You're young. You think this will never catch up to you. You think that I'm going to live forever. I have all the time in the world to deal with this. You don't know what you're talking about, boomer, but I do. And when I talk about it, this isn't just some isolated thing that happened to me. This is what the studies tell us happens. And this is what my anecdotal experience with law student after law student after law student tells me happens. The more you kick that can down the road, the harder it is going to be to deal with it just before everything explodes. So I tell them to make a list of the resources you have. Figure out what you're comfortable with and use them. Make a list of your compassionate community within the law student community, within your family. Have you reached out to any of them? Have you told them they can reach out and check on you? Rely on your compassionate community. Even if you don't want to use a structured recovery path, there are people around you that are probably willing to help. You have just projected out the worst possible experience in reaching out to them. So I don't give them any magic pill. I try to be real. I try to be authentic. And I don't tell them everything's going to be okay, because it's not going to be okay if you don't reach for it at the highest possible point.
Thank you, Brian. Kelly, this is a good segue to you. Kelly, please can you say a little bit about yourself and what you deal with, but specifically when you were dealing with employers, how do we handle the stigma of mental illness, and on top of that, the stigma of not the stigma, but the other implications on top of mental illness, for example, the implications of gender or race on top of issues involving substance abuse or mental illness.
Thank you for that, Matthew. And Matt, I don't know why I called you Matthew. I just looked at your name and said Matthew. So everyone, hello.
Also, do you want to hold up your book now?
This is one of them. Ace Your Workplace Investigations. That's one of them. This is my latest book, which is Conversations Change Things, which has come out of all of the work that everyone's doing around racial justice. But I'm Kelly Charles Collins. You all know that. Tomorrow is my 25th anniversary for being sworn into the Florida bar, so I'm very excited about that. But as of last year, the end of last year, I retired from the practice of law. And like Matt and Brian I've known forever, because Brian and I worked together at the Public Defender's Office, but I've been a trial attorney my entire time, and during that time, I worked on employment law cases for over 20 years. And so right now, my focus is on unconscious bias, bystander intervention, and training around those issues and consulting around those issues. And right now, doing lots of listening sessions around racial justice and racism. And so when you ask the question about mental health and the stigma, we know that our profession is predominantly white male, right? And there is this manliness to our profession. And, you know, as a Black woman, I had to learn how to navigate those spaces. So as a woman first, and then as a Black woman on top of it, having to navigate those spaces. So when you're talking about somebody who has a mental health issue, right? And so they may have a mental health issue and be a woman, a mental health issue and be a Black woman or a Latinx woman or some other minority category, that really just exacerbates the whole issue, because now you're trying to overcome all of these levels of really perceived competence, right? Because the further you move away from whiteness, the further you move away from white maleness, you were talking about competence. And so when you're talking about somebody who has a mental health issue, how do they, how do they show up? So I've been through, I've gone past the bar. I now show up at your law firm and I know that I have a mental health issue. How do we deal with that? Well, there's two people who have to deal with it, right? The law firm and whoever you're speaking to, and the law firm has to deal with it. And you, as the person who has the mental health issue, have to deal with it. With regards to law firms and managing partners, part of removing the stigma or mitigating the stigma is around education, right? So many people talk about mental health, but do we really even understand what that means? Do we even understand what the impact of somebody having a mental health issue means, right? If somebody's suffering from depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or whatever it is that they're suffering from as far as impacting their mental health, do law firms even know what that means? One, and then do they care, right? So it's one thing to raise awareness. It's another thing for somebody to care about the impact of what they've learned. And so in order for there to be any type of change around this, we're going to have to get educated on the issue. And then we're going to have to give a damn, right? We have to give a damn that this is something that people live with every single day and it impacts their daily lives. But it doesn't mean that they can't work. It doesn't mean that they can't be damn good lawyers. It doesn't mean that they can't be excellent lawyers, right? It just may mean that in certain circumstances, they may need help, right? They may need a break, right? So even with me, I don't have a mental health disorder, but I do know the stress and the anxiety that came from being a trial lawyer. And, Brian was talking about how he coped with it. And for me, some of what I would do is work more, right? So if I got to the point where I just felt overwhelmed or I felt that I was stressed out and I was like, okay, well, I just got to do more. I got to do more. I got to do more, right? Because you're overcompensating. Well, think of how that impacts somebody who has a mental health disorder, somebody who is battling a manic episode, right? Or a depressive episode. And now you're just putting more and more and more and more on top of them, right? And so, other things I would do is just go to sleep. I would just, it would just be too much and I would just go to sleep because it's like I can't do anything else. And so education is part of it, really being human, right? And empathetic and caring about people is another part of it. The other part, though, is the responsibility of the person who has the mental health condition. So Brian was talking about that, like making the decision to ask for help. We all know that there is perceived or sometimes real consequences for doing that, right? It could be retaliation. It could be that you don't get the job. It could be all of a sudden, okay, well, now your performance is terrible. And now, you're getting written up. And so now you don't have a job anymore. However, the way the law is written, if we just talk about the law, when you're talking about disabilities, right? If you have a disability and requesting an accommodation, it's up to you. Right? It's up to you to request the accommodation and talk to your employer. Now, you don't have to tell them exactly what your condition is. You can just say, I have a medical condition that I need help to be able to fulfill the essential functions of my job, right? So that's the conversation that you have with them. And they can ask you, what is the accommodation? And you should be prepared to say, what is the accommodation that you need? So if it's that I just need to have some time off, I just need, I just can't go to this meeting this week. I know you all are having a social. I'm having an issue. I just can't make it to that meeting this week, right? And so you have to think about what it is that would be reasonable and what it is that is going to help you to do your job. But what happens is, because we are afraid of what happens if we expose, right, our condition, then we don't say anything. So now you're in a pickle, because if your medical condition, your mental health condition starts to impact your work, and now you start getting written up about your performance, and you still don't want to say anything, right, so that you can have an accommodation, at some point you're going to lose your job. And at the point that you're losing your job and you say, but wait, I have this mental health condition, it's too late, right? If they've given you the opportunity to be able to bring this up, it's too late. It's not a shield, right, against bad performance. And so while it's hard, part of mitigating the stigma and part of removing the stigma is for the people who are suffering from mental health conditions to really put themselves out there, right? It's one of the things we talk about now around all of these issues. Silence can no longer be an option, right? So silence from the people who are impacted by it personally, but also the people around them who know. So if we know that somebody is suffering from a mental health issue and they ask for an accommodation, and we see the partners or the supervisors or everybody else, now all of a sudden they start to do something negatively to impact that person. No, we need to speak up, right? We need to then say, no, that's not right. You can't do that. So I think it's really education, but it's also being your own voice and really speaking up and taking back the power, trying to take back the power. But you have to speak up for yourself. I think Brian was saying that when he was explaining it. It's like, you have to make the choice. And just like Brian was saying, it's not good when it gets down here, right? So it's not good when you're now like 1 foot out the door. When you come in, whether it's while you're applying for the job, if you need help, if you need an accommodation to be able to even apply for the job, then you need to ask for that accommodation. When you get into the job, you need to ask for the accommodation right then, so that, we need to speak up, right? So we have to take on this culture of being our best advocate.
Thank you. One of the important issues too that I always get as an employment attorney is, when is the appropriate time to disclose? Because the stigma, I would imagine disclosing prior to being hired would be a problem. What do you think about that, Kelly?
Well, I think it depends on what you need, right? So you can disclose whenever you want. It's a personal issue, right? That it's personal when you want to do it. But if you need an accommodation to be able to even apply for the job, then you need to talk about it then. If you need an accommodation to be able to sit through an interview, some law firms have these panel interviews. I don't know if Brian, if you had one. When I went to the public defender's office, we had a panel interview, right? If that's something that is going to impact you, just having all these eyes like staring at you, and maybe it would be better if we were sitting in a circle so I don't feel so impacted by that, then that might be something that you have to ask for, right? Just say, I have a medical condition that, it would be helpful if we're having a panel interview, instead of me sitting across the table and looking at everyone, if we could just sit together in a circle or sit in some other configuration, that would help me to get through the interview, right? So it depends on how it's going to impact you. If it doesn't impact you for the interview, then I wouldn't say anything. Now, when you get to work, if you know that it's going to impact you either because you've had another job or because from law school how it impacts you, as far as, I can't have my office next to the break room, right? All of that noise is just going to impact me. So say, because of a medical condition, can you ensure that my office is away from from the break room. So you have to figure out what it is, because if it's going to affect your ability to complete the essential functions of your job, writing briefs, going to court, taking depositions, mediations, whatever those things are, then you need to say something at the earliest point possible so that you can give yourself the best opportunity to excel, right? You can't hide behind it or run from it, and then when you don't excel, say, well, it's because I didn't. Well, maybe your employer doesn't know, especially if it's a mental health condition, that might not be, visible to someone. People may not know. They just think, I hired this person, I thought that they were really good, and now their work sucks, right? But it's because you're having a challenge because of a medical condition. Well, the only way to relieve that is to say something. So it depends on you and where you are and where it's going to impact you in your role. And sometimes we don't even know, right? Sometimes we may not even know that has happened because we've never been in this type of situation. Like being a lawyer is a whole different kettle of fish from a whole bunch of stuff. The pressures that come with being a lawyer, and especially in certain situations, is just sometimes unbearable, even for people who don't have mental health conditions. So I could imagine how it exacerbates. So you may not even realize that that's going to happen to you, but the moment that you do, then you should speak up.
And Matthew, I talk to students who are freaked out about something like telling the firm, applying and telling them that they go to AA meetings. They don't want them to know. And they're afraid it's going to negatively impact them. Now, obviously I'm not omniscient, and I can't say, if you say something, they're not going to give you an accommodation or this or that. And it's going to depend. In big law, it's not going to matter. It's much more open about those things. It's much more progressive with the ABA Wellness Pledge and all those things. But there could be smaller firms or medium-sized firms that are much more parochial in their views on those things. But they project out all of these negative things about something as simple as AA, when in fact, you may be telling the person you may be telling is in AA. So,
and you don't even have to tell them it's AA. You should just say, because of a medical condition, I have a meeting that I need to attend on every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. That means I'm asking if I can leave work on that day at 5 o'clock so that I can get there.
That's right. That's right. And then the firm tries to offer an accommodation. I've seen this happen. And they say, well, can you, and for people who have actually disclosed 12-step, well, we know there are all these meetings and you can go to this one. Well, the lawyer freaks out even more because they've gone to this meeting for years. This is the meeting they want to be at. This is the meeting that's important to their mental health and their recovery. So it can be a very nuanced situation.
Yeah, but they don't get to choose, right? So your employer doesn't get to choose that you get to go to this meeting or not, right? If I ask for an accommodation, a reasonable accommodation, unless it poses some undue hardship, which is a very high burden, particularly in a law firm, right? Unless it's an undue burden, then they have to grant your accommodation. And so if I'm going to a meeting, that shouldn't impact anything.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, and in big law, that's not an issue. But you get down to small firm, boutique firm, there's what the law says, and there's what happens in that room.
Right. It's like everything, right, around employment law, right? It's what the law says and it's what the people do. And I think that goes back to what I was saying originally about being educated and giving a damn, right? It's about humanity.
And also an important fact, in Florida, the ADA covers 15 or more employees, but different counties have different ordinances. Like, for example, Miami-Dade covers employers that have 5 or more employees. So you have more protections depending on what county you're in.
Yeah. And Florida, almost every single county has its own rules, and they start. Some of them are one employee, some 1 plus,
Yeah.
but some of and a lot of them are 4 or 5. So it depends. Most people don't know about those laws. Everybody knows about the EEOC, or they may know their state law, but they don't know the county ordinances. And as far as county ordinances,
Well, you
do
bring up a great
they have
point.
that much weight?
You bring up a great point. If you're a law student going into a new job, and you're in recovery from a substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder, educate yourself on what the statutes are, what the law says, because what's going to happen if you don't and you just go in there on the fly is you are going to fill in that information void, projecting out the worst possible result.
Yeah.
And that is going to be a trigger in itself.
Yeah.
So now, Brian, I have a question for you, because a lot of the folks here that have issues have not become members of the bar yet. Should they seek help before they become a member of the bar? Do they have to disclose it to the Florida Board of Bar Examiners? And what do they do? I mean, when you first go to law school, you go to a meeting when you have somebody with the Florida Board of Bar Examiners, and they're like, you have to disclose everything. Now you have an issue. Do you disclose? Do you not disclose? Do you get help? Do you not get help? Do you care about what the Board of Bar Examiners says?
Well, thank you for asking. And a lot of what I've listened to kind of merges into my world, which is representing lawyers and law students and law firms. So I see it on all sides. And I think one of the things that Brian Cuban mentioned that I see hourly is fear. There's a tremendous amount of fear of what is the reaction going to be if anybody finds out that I have a problem, whether it's a mental issue or an alcohol issue, a drug issue, a gambling issue. What is going to happen to me? And I've been doing this for 25 years, and I can say, for example, when a lawyer gets arrested for DUI and they come to me, one of the first things I talk about is, have you told your employer? No, I'm getting ready for a trial. I'm involved in this very big case, and I don't know what they're going to do. And I always say, what do you think they're going to do if they find out? And they find out from somebody else. I always give the affair example. Having an affair is bad. Do you want to tell your wife, or do you want your wife to find out from somebody else and then come confront you? So I always have this discussion about, go tell your employer what happened. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Mm-hmm. The only experience I have is that in 25 years, I've not once represented a lawyer in any law firm, big law, small law, who got arrested for DUI, told their employer within a couple of days, and was fired. It may have happened somewhere else, but in the clients that I've represented, and I've represented a few, it has never happened. Now, when you look at law students, there's a different kind of fear, because you don't yet have your license. And your fear is, what is the Board of Bar Examiners going to do when they find out? Well, first of all, you got to look at the application. One of the issues I deal with all the time is, do I have to disclose this? And the question on the application is usually very specific. It refers to a diagnosis of some sort of mental disability, or that you've had alcohol treatment or drug treatment. What it normally doesn't say is, have you ever gone and seen a therapist? So if a law student goes and sees a therapist for a few sessions and the therapist says, yeah, I think you're just a little anxious, but you're fine, I'm not diagnosing you. Generally, that doesn't have to be disclosed. The other thing that needs to be looked at is, and this just changed a few years ago, they changed the timing of it. So it used to be, for example, in Florida, you would have to disclose any diagnosis within the last 10 years. They then reduced that to 5 years. And interestingly enough, when that happened, I had 2 clients that were ready for their hearings. And the Board of Bar Examiners wrote me a letter and said, these 2 clients are now eligible, because they're between 5 and 10 years on their diagnosis, to withdraw the answer to that question and say no. And to their credit, I went to both clients, who both said, I'll talk about it all day, I don't care. And they went to their hearings, and they were asked very few questions about it, but they were asked about it, and everything worked out. I think the fear is misplaced, because my experience with the Board of Bar Examiners is that their main concern is, has your mental disability manifested itself in a situation that we need to be concerned about? For example, I had a client who was bipolar and had an issue with his girlfriend that resulted in law enforcement getting involved. And so the board wanted to ask about that. They weren't necessarily interested in the bipolar diagnosis. They wanted to know what happened here. So I think the fear is misplaced when it comes to the Board of Bar Examiners. I know there have been issues, but in the cases I have dealt with, I have seen the Board of Bar Examiners focus on the conduct related possibly to the mental disability. And the last thing I want to say, and Brian Cuban touched on this, and I think it's essential, is this issue of Florida Lawyers Assistance or any LAP, Lawyers Assistance Program nationwide. The fear that it is not confidential. I can tell you, I refer clients to Florida Lawyers Assistance a couple of times a month. And it is so confidential that a client will call me to tell me something about a drug test or a meeting or something going on with their classes or their therapy sessions. And I will call FLA and speak to someone I know very well who knows who I am. And they will say to me, we can't discuss this with you unless we get a written waiver from the client. And, you know, I referred the client to you. I sent you an email that said, Joe's going to be calling you, and he just called me, and they will not talk to me. So I think we're in a time now, and this is what I'll close on before we move on to whatever else we're going to talk about, but this is a bad time for everybody. I don't care if you're happy working from home. I don't care if you're making money. I don't care what's going on in your life. We live our lives as lawyers, and I think Kelly kind of touched on the manly issue. That's the lawyer ego. When you ask lawyers, how is everything? They always say, everything's fine. How's business? Business is great. Everything is always just fine. And you know what? It's not fine. Things aren't fine. And I think one of the things we can do is have better conversations, like Kelly was saying. For example, it's not enough to say, are you okay? How is everything, right? The next question is, because you know if everything's not okay, we can talk about it. And if you don't get anywhere there, then throw out an example and say, listen, you know, things aren't okay with me right now. It may appear that they are, but they're not. I can tell you that there are a lot of lawyers running around town who are well respected, who have serious problems, and nobody knows about it. And you should never be afraid, especially in today's day and age, to say, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a drug addict, I have a mental disability, whatever it is, because chances are, and this goes back to the first thing I said, when people come to me and say, well, I work for this big law firm and I can't tell them that I got a DUI, I say, whether I know it or not, there are plenty of lawyers in your law firm that experienced the same thing you did, and they're still there.
Yeah.
And to follow
And I
up
think
on-
it's so, I'm sorry, Brian. No, I was going to say, Brian, I think it's so important what you said about, you know, that we run around thinking that we're fine, or that we see people and we think that they're fine. And we know just over the past couple of years, just even in Miami, I mean, I started practicing in Miami, we've had people that we've known for a long time, you know, in the circles down there who've committed suicide. And everybody's like, wait, what? Like, I thought that everything was good with them. I thought everything was fine. And, you know, it's so important when I do train, especially around when we're talking about racial justice and just asking that question, you know, how are you? We've been so trained to just ask that question. It's really a throwaway question. Oh, how are you doing? And the person says, fine. We're really not waiting for the answer, right? We really don't even care what the answer is. We just know that that's the polite thing to do, is to say, hey, how are you doing? Right? But it's so important to listen to what that answer is and to say, no, how are you really doing? Right?
The 2-ask rule.
Probe.
That's right. I call that the 2-ask rule.
Yep.
And when someone is struggling, whether you think they are, you don't know, maybe it's just a bad day, there is no downside to asking them how they're doing and waiting for an answer before that conversation breaks. say, well, do you know that if you want to talk to me, you can, and here's my information. The to ask rule. Now, they may say, I'm fine. That's okay. But what has happened is you have become a cog in a link. And if everyone practiced the to ask rule, you have become a chain of people taking care of people, where it may be one person down the road, two people down the road, three people down the road, where the person says, thank you for asking, I'm struggling.
That's right.
You may never even know that you have helped that person immensely just by asking how they're doing twice.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's not a throwaway question, especially now. Like, I mean, you were saying about, COVID. This is a trauma, right? So we were in the house with COVID, and that was traumatic for people. People lost their lives. People lost family members. People lost their jobs, their livelihoods, right? And then we had the whole thing around George Floyd, and that was another trauma, right? And so it's compounded. It's just, and we really have to pay attention to that. We really have to, they always say, check on your strong friends, because they're not doing well, right? Because we always think that the people that we know are strong, oh, they'll be okay. I don't need to check on them. No, you need to check on them too, right?
And the community.
Yeah.
And remember that one of the important things about the to ask rule is that look them in the eye. Do not turn your back on them after you asked it, because then they know that you don't care.
Yeah, it's just a throwaway.
You have to listen to the answer, give it a second, and then ask again.
Yep. I agree.
Now, going back to the bar, a lot of folks are going to take the bar, and now it's going to be about 3 weeks. What are your suggestions with regards to what we can do? Do we ask them, are you okay? Do we say, what can we do? How do we support those that are at bat for the fourth time?
One, I think we should ask them, what support do they need, right? Sometimes when we reach out to people, we impose upon them what we think that they need, right? I think even with the people who are on now, I don't know if anyone's asking questions, but, what support do they need? Do they need help with studying? Do they need somebody to just talk to? Do they need to vent? Do they need, tips on how do I take this test? And what happens if, like, during my bar exam, they had to call an ambulance because somebody passed out in the middle of the bar exam, right? And then that night we had a fire drill at the hotel. Like, ask people. I think part of it is to ask them, do they need support? Like, not to assume that they do.
The other thing I think that's important, and I do this, and it's not for everybody, but I believe in being brutally honest with people. I do this all the time when I read about somebody losing a pet, and I've lost many pets. And my response is always the same. There is nothing worse. While everybody's saying, I'm sorry, that's terrible, hope you get another animal, I just jump in and I say, there is nothing worse. And I don't want to speak for people who have failed the bar or are waiting for the bar exam to be given in Florida, but it sucks. And they don't want to be given a bunch of BS from people on the other side. So when I'm talking to someone who has failed the bar, I'm not just going to say, well, you'll pass it eventually.
Right.
Or someone who has been a victim of the bar exam being canceled to say, well, eventually, you'll take it and you'll be fine. You have to empathize with people and let them know that you understand the situation that they're in. You can't just sit on high and say, well, everything's going to be fine, because that's in the future, maybe, possibly. These people have been, victims of the failure of the Florida Board of Bar Examiners, and they don't want somebody to say, well, it's okay, and, put your hand on their head and say, hey, everything's going to be fine. You have to be brutally honest with people and say, listen, you're in a tough situation. I wouldn't want to be in your situation. Yes, I know people who have taken the bar 3 times and eventually passed it. One of them became governor of Florida. But other than that, you just have to be honest and say, listen, I wouldn't want to be in your situation right now. All I can tell you is you just got to keep fighting, because if you stop now, it's over.
Yeah.
And Brian, to follow up on what you're saying about taking the bar, I failed the bar twice before passing it the third time in Texas. But the first time I took the Texas bar exam, my study aids were bar review books I borrowed the weekend before, 3.5 ounces of cocaine, a fifth of Jack Daniels, and a liter of Tab. I was deep in, and of course I failed. I was deep in alcohol use disorder and cocaine use disorder. Well, that's not you. I get that. But part of evaluating where we are and why we didn't pass the bar exam is also taking accountability in our story, taking accountability in why we failed, and how can you possibly, the Peter principle of recovery, right? Working up to our level of incompetence that keeps shrinking. If you are in the middle of untreated depression, if you are in the middle of alcohol use disorder, if you are in the middle of using cocaine, meth, opioids, I've heard it all. How are you possibly going to walk into a bar exam, even if you think you've cleaned it out for 3 days, and give your best effort? It's impossible. So what do we need to do is plan ahead and begin that journey at the earliest possible point before you're sitting in that hotel room with the baggie of cocaine and the fifth. Because that sounds weird and you're saying, oh yeah, that's you, Cuban. No, this goes on.
Yeah. And I think that, Brian, I'm so happy that you said that, because we think of things like that as being, that's something that you read in a book. That's, that's fiction. That's what we see on TV. No, those are our colleagues. Those are our soon to be colleagues. Those are your friends. Those are your family members.
What happens when
things are happening?
You're right. And what happens when people know they are facing incredible stress and they have mental health issues? They look for the crutch. The crutch may be the alcohol. The crutch may be the cocaine. The crutch may be this, maybe that.
Yeah.
But often that crutch is not healthy.
Yeah.
Well, this was a phenomenal discussion. And I hope this is a start of a conversation that we could all have, and that we could have more as a profession to reduce the stigma, to welcome these folks into the profession, and acknowledge that there are problems and that we have to address those problems. Does anybody else have anything they want to say in closing?
I just want to say something, if I can, that, a lot of what I talk about when it comes to licensing is from experience. I have a tough situation. I've never had a drug problem. I've never had an alcohol problem. I don't suffer from any mental health issues. I have a family member who was a serious drug addict, and we're still very close. And so I lived through that. And many of my clients are in that situation where they suffer from something. And so I have a little bit of a disconnect, and the only way that I'm able to connect is to say, let me tell you about my history with representing lawyers and law firms. And I think one of the important things that I've learned in 25 years is disclosure is so important. One of the issues that the Board of Bar Examiners constantly talks about is that we don't really care what your problem is. We just want to know if you're comfortable discussing it. And the interesting thing is, I've been friends with Brian Cuban for a long time. I've spent a lot of time with him personally. And I listened to his opening, and he just sounded like he was, sitting at a ball game having a conversation. It was absolutely, he's talking about some of the worst moments in his life. And by the way, spoiler, he hasn't mentioned many of the worst moments in his life.
Can you imagine?
And he just sounded like, he was sitting literally at a ball game eating a hot dog, talking to a friend of his. And I can tell you that's probably not how it started with him when he was first talking about it. But now it's been so long, and he's done so much, and he's talked about it so many times, that he clearly feels comfortable coming on the internet and saying, listen, this is my life story. And if you can get to that point, it will make your life so much easier, because I have people who walk out of bar hearings or walk out of their managing partner's offices and say, you were right. I told them everything and everything's fine. And it's such a counterintuitive thing, especially with law students and lawyers, to take the position of, if I'm just honest and open, sooner than later, it will all be okay. But that is the absolute truth. And I say that from experience.
Yeah. And for me, like my one of the models I live by in life is that self-preservation is key. And so part of being able to preserve yourself is to preserve your mental health, right? And so when you are fighting, right, not disclosing, so as to what Brian is saying, when you're fighting, hiding everything, and you're trying to cover for whatever it is you're trying to hide, I mean, the battle that you're waging against yourself, right? We think that we're doing something good, right? But the battle that you are waging against yourself is phenomenal. I mean, just the impact, how we're tearing down our own selves. And, you know, here's the thing. If I tell you something about me and you use that against me, or you don't want me in your space, thank you. Then I shouldn't be in your space, right? I always believe, the other motto I have is, I belong everywhere I am, but I don't belong everywhere. And so if you aren't compassionate enough to understand that I have a mental health issue, and it may impact me some days and other days may not, and for you just don't even have the humanity to deal with me, then I don't need to be in your space. And so you have to accept me. For me, I want you to accept me, who I am. It's like, you know, people say they don't see color. No, I want you to know I'm Black, right? I need you to know I'm Black. I need you to acknowledge I'm Black. So if I have an invisible disability or a visible one, I need you to know, because I need you to accept me, all of who I am, so that I can show up every single day authentically as who I am, so that I can step into my greatness every day, so that I can excel, right? So I agree with you, Brian. Like, it's scary. Right? I just wrote that book that I told you is coming out. And for me, it was disclosing a lot of things that have happened over my life. And I'm scared, right? I'm a little bit scared for it to all come out, but it's important for people to understand who I am, what drives me. And I think that that's also important for young lawyers to understand, is that this profession will eat you alive. Right? I got to the point where I was getting so anxious on Sunday about billable hours. I was just like, enough, right? It will eat you alive. And so if you don't do the things that you know that you need to do in order to protect yourself, you're going to get eaten, right? You're going to suffer. And so, you know, preserve yourself and take care of yourself.
And I know we're out of time, but I want to follow up on that, because I've lived that with drug and alcohol use. I say I had a JD, but I had a PhD in concealment, hiding and concealment. The concealing and putting up that brick wall around me so no one could see what I was going through, and no one could see the shame that I had turned inward, took up so much energy.
Yeah.
I was tired. I was always tired. And let me tell you what happens from an interpersonal relationship standpoint when that happens. Let's push the law firms aside. Let's talk about our family, our loved ones, our wives, our children. When you put up that wall, and you spend all of this energy making sure that nothing gets out, it doesn't allow anywhere for love to get in. And that is going to take the path of least resistance to something sad.
Yeah.
So step into some greatness and let the love in.
That's right.
I think that's where we end it. Thank you so much, Brian T., Brian C., and Kelly. You guys have been great. And if anybody has any problems or questions or needs somebody to talk to, you know how to reach me. You know how to reach Brian.
And I'm on LinkedIn. Easy to find me.
I'm everywhere.
You're welcome, Ashley.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right,
Thanks,
take care.
everyone. It was a pleasure.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.